Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live today. Thank you all for joining us here as we start another fantastic session about our new historical records that we've added to MyHeritage. We currently have 19.5 billion historical records on MyHeritage, and we are constantly adding more and more collections every single day. I think it's around a new collection a day. That's pretty much the pace that we are at. So there are so many new collections. We have been doing these Facebook Lives every 2 weeks in order to tell you about all the new collections and also to do a recap of some of our most important or most overlooked collections that we think you should know about and that you may enjoy as well. So we have a great session lined up for you today. We have our Director of Content, Mike Mansfield, and he'll be joining us very soon to run through all the new collections that we've recently added. There were some really, really big ones in the mix there. So I know there are some collections that a lot of you will be really excited about. I won't give anything away just yet. I'll let Mike spoil that. But first, I just want to say hello to everybody here in our audience. We have people from all over the world. So hello to all of you. If you haven't written us yet, please do let us know where you're tuning in from today. I see Dave Mansfield in the audience. He wants to know if he's related to you, Mike. So you'll have to do a little family history research after and see if you are related in any way. As we know, we are all related in some way or another, and MyHeritage helps us all figure out how and what we have in common. So we're so glad to be able to do that for all of you. I see a question, is there a handout? So there isn't a handout, but Mike will be showing some slides today. He'll put them up on the screen. And as well, there is a recording of today's session. We always do recordings. So today's session will be available afterwards on the MyHeritage Facebook page under the videos section. So you'll find it there. So just before we get to Mike and his talk, I just want to let you know that we'll be doing a giveaway today. We will be giving away a MyHeritage Complete plan. So that's the best plan that we have to offer at MyHeritage. We'll be giving it away to one lucky viewer in the audience. So in order to enter to the draw, all that you have to do is leave us a question or a comment in the comment section. Maybe just let us know if one of these collections is interesting to you or if you've done any research yet in any of these new collections. That would be great to hear. We'd love to hear how the new collections that are coming out interest our audience, and if they have family in that area that they're very excited to search for or something like that. So definitely leave us a question or comment and you'll be entered in our draw that we'll do at the end of today's show. So now it is my pleasure to bring on Mike Mansfield. He'll be giving our session today. Let's bring him into the, let's bring him on here to say hello to everybody. Hello, Mike.
Hey, Esther, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good.
So I see a lot of, I see some Canadians. I know they'll be happy with some of the updates that we have here. And let's see, Charles from Florida, Sandy from Colorado, James from Michigan. So great to see you all in our audience. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. Let me bring up your, I'll bring up your screen and we can get started. There we go.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. It's really nice to be here with you again. Let's dive right in. So the outline for today, I'm going to spend the first 10 to 12 minutes just on the first few collections here. We're actually going to spend the bulk of our time together today talking about the amazing 1931 Canada Census. I'll also use that as a segue to highlight two collections that I want to build a little bit of a case study around from the 1931 Canada Census, and that's the Norway immigration registers as well as the Ellis Island and New York passenger list. So again, content from Belgium, the United States, France, the United Kingdom, Canada, Norway, and the US. The first collection is a pretty interesting type of census from Belgium, the municipality of Aalst. If you see here on the map, here is Brussels, and so this municipality is just to the west of Brussels. And down here at the bottom right of this map, you see a bigger map of the entire country of Belgium with this particular location highlighted. So let's go over to the records, historical record search area of MyHeritage, and we'll start in the collection catalog. And I'll just type Aalst. I think we have a number of collections from this location, but the one that I want to highlight with you here are the population registers. If you haven't seen Belgian population registers, these are actually pretty interesting. A census-like document. Let's say I want to search for Marie Josephine Martin, born 1854. Okay, so here we have a record for Marie Josephine Martin. Number of nice pieces of information here from the index, including her full birth date, her residence. So this particular document is from 1867, and then a really nice full color image down here. And if I remember right, Marie is here on line 44. Maureen Joseph Martin, we get information about her birth date again, her marital status. It says that she's married to number 10 above. I'm sorry, this is number 11, not 44. So this is 10 and 11. And so that we have a husband and spouse. And it gives us information about their employment. So a really nice little collection from Belgium. If you have a Belgian family from this area of Belgium, definitely take a look. Next, I want to highlight two collections we recently released from the United States. The first one is a set of incarceration records from the Nebraska Department of Correctional Services. And the second one is a fairly large update to a death index from Nebraska. Let's jump over and we'll look at some of these as well. So again, just in the catalog, I can type something like Nebraska, and I can get any collection that has that term in it. This one here that was just updated just a few days ago is the one that I wanted to show. So here in Nebraska, I'm sorry, that's deaths. Let's go do the correctional one first. I'm getting ahead of myself. I apologize. So here are the incarcerations released on September 6th. We don't have a lot of this type of content on MyHeritage, so this was actually fairly interesting to me to see what one can find in something like a prison register like this. So I'm searching here for a Cleveland J. Avery, born in 1953. Here's an example of the record. Here we have his name, his gender, a full birth date, the date that his sentence began, information about his minimum and maximum term, the parole date, earliest release date, other information here. So this can help us understand when family members or people were researching maybe for DNA matches, other aspects of the work we do may have been incarcerated or not. So yeah, kind of an interesting little collection from Nebraska from the Department of Corrections. Let's next go look at this Nebraska death collection. Here we go, Nebraska deaths updated just earlier this week. I think we added almost, it was like 800,000 additional records to this, adding the years of, 1969 to 2019. So what's really important here in the United States is since 2014, since the federal government stopped allowing the release of the Social Security Death Index, we have kind of this desert for death records. It's much more challenging to find death events. And so a collection like this that goes all the way up to 2019 helps us start to fill that gap. Let's look at an example here of someone like a Max Gary Miller. In this case, let's use a birth year of 1946. So here he is, Max Gary Miller, again, gender, a full birth date. That's really wonderful when we get a birth event or full birth date with our death information. So April 2nd, 2003, and information about the mother and father, including what looks like to be the mother's maiden name. So very, very helpful. Let me just go back and we'll look one more. If I can jump back properly, let me go here. We'll jump back in there. And I'll show you an example of a death record that you really would have a hard time finding outside of a collection like this. Let's look for any death in, say, the year 2019. So there's 17,000 deaths here from Nebraska, and birth date of 2020. Wow, this woman lived to a very advanced age, what, 99 years old or so, with a death date that would be, yeah, like I said, quite hard to find in other sources. A father and a mother, again, with a, looks like the mother's maiden name. So really excellent information. Moving on, I want to give an update about our ongoing work with the France censuses. I've done some updates in these sessions previously with Esther, so I won't go too deeply into these, but if you do want to see some examples where I show these a little bit more deeply, I would recommend that you look back. I think a month ago and maybe the one before that, I highlighted these. As we look at France, we need to understand there's 96 departments in France. Here I'm highlighting the departments that are just right around Paris, and then the island of Corsica, and then the main body of France there that you see on the continent of Europe. So those departments add up to 96. And the department I just highlighted here on the left, these are some of their overseas departments, as well as these two on the right. So when we look at French census, we're really considering what's called metropolitan France, or the France that's in Europe, including the island of Corsica, just off the coast of France and Italy. So 1911, for this update in the last, I think 2 weeks, in the last 2 weeks, we've added 2.5 million additional records, adding the records from 7 more departments that I've listed here. And 1931 also got an update, just adding over 3 million records from 8 more departments. And 2 weeks ago, Miko would have mentioned the release of an update to 1921 as well. We're well on track with our work here with these 3 large French censuses from 1911, 1921, and 1931, and hope to wrap these up in the next couple of months. Let's see. Before I jump back to Chrome, let's look at, excuse me one second. United Kingdom deceased estates notices. So just kind of like we saw with the Nebraska death index, finding modern, very recent death information can be a challenge, not only here in the United States, but also in the United Kingdom. This type of content here, published initially in the Gazette and then extracted into these estate notices, gives us a chance to potentially find some deaths. Now, not everyone who passed away in the United Kingdom would have a publication of an estate like this that I'll show you. But let's jump over to a browser again. And let's search for, I don't know, estate notices. There we go. So released on September 6th, this was a brand new collection, just over 700,000 records. And when we come here, let's look for this example, Charles Henry Tallman. And I want to do a death date of 2010. And as the description says, this is mostly content from 1998 and forward. So if we do search here, whoops, what am I doing wrong? Let me just clear this. Charles Henry. Well, it would help if I could spell properly. Tallman. Let's just do that. Charles Henry Tallman. Still doesn't quite like what I put in, but that's fine. So here's, this is the record I was hoping to find. Charles Henry. We get a full address. That's really quite awesome. Looks like right down to the street with our postal code. We get a death date, the date of publication in the London Gazette, other information that could lead us back to some probate documents. One thing that's very important, in my opinion, to look at an index like this is look to see who else might be named. So we see a Charles Edward Tallman listed here. Likely this is some sort of relative, most likely a son, perhaps a brother, someone else like this. And so we get a clue here about someone that we can dive deeper into. So that's the deceased estate notices. Apologize, I'm battling just a little bit of hay fever this morning, I think. All right, let's spend the rest of our time together, next little bit of 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes on the 1931 Canada Census. We'll first dive into the different form types. I'll give a very short 30-second historical context of the census. We'll look at the organization of the census and how we can use that in our research. A slide or two on the release of the census, what happened leading up to the release just last week of the 1931 census on MyHeritage. Some interesting statistics that you might enjoy, some tips and strategies along the way, and then we'll also end with a case study, a brief case study. Well, I'll jump into those Norwegian passenger records as well as the Ellis Island and New York passenger list from a record here from the Canadian Census. All right, so the forms, most of the 1931 Canadian Census was recorded on one of two types of forms, Form 1A and Form 1B. If we add up these numbers, we see that we only get to 99%. And that's because an additional schedule was developed for use in the Northwest Territories and certain parts of the Yukon and northern parts of Ontario. So the left side of Form 1B versus 1A. So at the top here, I have Form 1B. At the bottom, I have Form 1A. And the differences are exclusively here in question 4. So in 1B, mostly focused on information about people living in more rural areas, information about the section, the range, the meridian that they're in. And then the bottom one second. Form 1A has a more open-filled type of format where they record their place of residence. Just looking briefly at Form 1A, again, these are quite rare, but you will run across them, especially if you're looking for fur trappers, as you see on this example. And just because these were heavily focused for First Nations peoples and indigenous populations, doesn't mean that you won't find Europeans or people of European descent here on these records. So here we have 2 families of Native Americans, 2 to 3 families of Eskimo, and then right here in the middle we get 3 gentlemen from Denmark listed as trappers. I'm going to jump over and we'll do a quick demonstration. So let's find this. I can type pretty much anything. 1931 census. Of course, I get the France census and the Canadian census. Let's go here. Yeah, so 10.4 million records. And the first record I want to look for is Ole Jorgensen. Whoops, I need to put his surname into the last name field. Jorgensen. And let's do a birth year of 1873. Go ahead and hit search. Yeah, so this record right here at the top is the one that I wanted to show. So we get some information in the summary card, and we can obviously click in and get more information, including his origin, kind of his nationality in a way, his religion. So in this index, we did decide to include their religion. We sometimes don't do that. But if you do have cases where you're trying to find people and you know their religion, that could help you find results, especially if you're working with, say, a very common surname. Springfield, Manitoba, this is a township just to the east, I believe, of Winnipeg. He's 58, he's married. He was naturalized in 1900, so some wonderful information in these documents about not only the year that they may have naturalized, but also the year that they immigrated. And then information about the subdistrict, father's birthplaces, mother's birthplaces, wife, and children. More information about the census, and then the actual census schedule down here. Here on the left, I can collapse or expand the household view. And in our case, our gentleman is right down here at the bottom with his family. So Ole Jorgensen. If we had more time, I'd walk through all of the fields with you. And at the end of the talk here in a few minutes, I'll give you a reference to another source if you want a little deeper dive. So it's interesting here that he's from Norway, but his wife is from France, and her wife's mother and father are from Belgium. So we get really nice information going back a couple generations for every individual here in the 1931 Canadian Census. A few comments about the geography of the census. So the only thing that really is important here to note, well, there's many things we could talk about, but the most important thing I wanted to point out is Newfoundland hadn't joined the Canadian Confederation until 1949. So they're not included in the 1931 Canadian Census. At this time, Newfoundland and Labrador are still possessions of the United Kingdom. The historical context that I wanted to really mention just briefly was the Great Depression in Canada. A few countries were affected as severely as Canada. This was due to heavy economic dependence on raw materials and exports, a worldwide drop in commodity prices, kind of doubling up the effect of the bullet above, a global trade war and high tariffs, which almost all industrial countries, United States, Canada, countries in Europe were engaging in at this time in the late 20s into the early 30s, and a swift decline in economic demand and credit. And then also a crippling drought in the prairie or the prairie provinces. Saskatchewan was particularly hard hit with huge unemployment, massive farm failures, crop failures due to the drought, and the Dust Bowl that extended all the way from Oklahoma in the United States way up into Manitoba and Saskatchewan and Alberta. The result was millions of Canadians were left unemployed, hungry, and often homeless. So as we think about these issues from the Great Depression, really starting there in 1929, we're about 2 years into it when the census was conducted on June 1st. Unfortunately, there were about 2 more years before the absolute bottom was hit, which is often considered to be 1933. So from June 1st, enumeration continued daily, except Sundays, until the enumerator finished their assignments. Be mindful of people moving around in the early summer of 1931 in Canada. When I lived in Quebec for a couple of years, I feel like only by late May, early June did the weather start to be consistently warm, and you felt like spring had finally taken hold. So definitely a time when people may be a little bit more mobile than otherwise. Anticipate an increase in multi-generational households. So these are, grandparents living with, an adult child who might also be the head of the household. That adult child could have children, and one of those children might also be married and have other children. So you could have 3 or sometimes even 4 generations living together. Anticipate more young men and young adults in general being away from the primary household as they perhaps are looking for opportunities for employment. Finally, anticipate non-family members boarding or lodging with a primary household as they were perhaps looking for additional ways to make a little bit of additional income. Next, I want to speak just a moment about the organization of the Canadian Census. It's very well structured by provinces and territories. And then below the province, we have districts and sub-districts. These are related to the federal election districts that are also used in Canada, and vice versa. There's kind of a weird chicken and an egg relationship between the census jurisdictions that they use as well as the elections, and the elections inform the census, and the census informs the election districts anyways. So here's District 35, and it has not only a number, but also a name, Chambly-Verchères, and Subdistrict 5, in this case, St. Bruno Parish, and it tells us there's pages 1 through 22. So how can we understand, how does this help us as we're looking for information in the census? So let's go to 1931 Canada again. And I'm going to search for Alexander Cost. If you remember that place that I had just shown you, it was called St. Bruno. And so we can put in St. Bruno. Now, there may be more than one St. Bruno in in Canada. I'm not sure. I did live in St. Bruno in Quebec for a while, but I'm not sure where else it might appear. But here's an example of a record that's showing us someone that lives in this sub-district of St. Bruno in the larger district of Chambly-Verchères in Quebec, Canada. And searching on this, I can get more information. Again, his religion, his age, marital status, all the other information that you would expect. One thing that I didn't mention earlier that I would like to point out is there's information over here about occupation that is not in the index. So the government of Canada was certainly very interested in understanding how the Depression was impacting immigration rates, and so they collected a number of data items or questions about people's particular employment status. But now that we understand that there's these sub-districts, we can do things like, okay, so this is Chambly district, and I can say this place must match. Let's take off the given name entirely, and let's say that the last name must match. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, the last name Lacoste must match exactly with residents of this sub-district and district that also must match. And what this will give me is this will return everyone in this sub-district with this surname. So here are all the people in the St. Bruno sub-district with the last name of Lacoste. Many of these are members of the same family. I think there's actually two separate families here. If I were to spend a minute with you, you would be able to see that. So again, Quebec districts have names, sub-districts, and sub-districts also have names, and sometimes a longer description that can also be helpful. Just jumping back briefly, let's just go to one record. I did want to show you when I'm looking at an image, so you see how there's 23 documents here. The first document in this sub-district is going to be that what we call that title board. And then the rest of the 23 documents will be pages 1 through 22. So this is page 1, for example, 1 through 22 of that sub-district. Great, so we luckily have access to some of these all the census maps for these districts and sub-districts. And so here's a URL, and I'll leave this up on a slide at the end of my talk, so don't worry if you don't have time to jot it down right now. I'll leave it up here in just a few minutes. I did want to show you how these work. So here is a map for this district, Chambly-Verchères, and I can zoom in and I can find a sub-district. So here's St. Bruno, and zooming in that I can see information about this village or town that's situated there, as well as the surrounding mostly farmland now. The other nice thing about these maps is they tell us what maps are to the sides of this particular map. So if I'm not in the right spot and I realize I need to go more to the south or more to the east or whatever, I can look at these other labels here and I can find these other maps, and I'll show you how to do that by let's going over to a web browser, and I'm going to put in that URL. So let me go grab it here from a note. No, here it is. So if you type in that short URL that I showed you, it will bring you to this website, which is an official publication website of the government in Canada. And it gives me all of the districts and sub-districts, and here's the one that I was looking at, so Chambly-Verchères, and I get a link to a PDF file here, which is the map. So for example, in this case, if I was too far to the north and I wanted to go to Saint-Jean-Iberville, I can come back, and looking through the province of Quebec a little bit more, I should be able to find this Saint-Jean-Iberville right down here, and clicking on that will show me the map for that district and all of its sub-districts. So you can kind of navigate around the geography with these maps. Quite nice and helpful to get a bearing of these different sub-districts, because it sometimes isn't perfectly clear about where, say, a rural farm or even a small town or village might be, and exactly which sub-district they might be in. So the release of the 1931 Canada Census. So the original paper returns were microfilmed in the 1950s by the Dominion Bureau of Statistics. The original paper census returns were subsequently destroyed, as is very common really around the world. To their credit, Statistics Canada, sort of the reformed or reorganized version of Dominion Bureau of Statistics, made a new master film copy in 2005 after there was some deterioration or fears of deterioration of the 1950s microfilm. That microfilm was held by Statistics Canada until January 1st of this year, when it was transferred to Library and Archives Canada. Exactly 187 rolls of microfilm. Library and Archives Canada digitized the microfilm and released the digital images on June 1st. And then through our partnership with Library and Archives Canada on June 1st, we're able to download those, and there's just over 230,000 images. As I mentioned, on June 1st, we downloaded the content. The next 2 to 3 days, we spent building the keying specification and preparing the images for keying. On June 5th, we started the index. On the 6th, we started to get portions of the index back from our indexing operations group. And then on August 20th, the index was completed. So that's about 80 days or so to 81 days actually, from June 1st to August 20th to create the index. So averaging about 130,000 records per day. And then the next 20 days or so, we completed data processing, some normalization tasks. I'll show you a very quick example of what some of this means in just a moment, and loading the content into the publication systems. And then on September 10th, the index was released on MyHeritage just last week. When I talk about data normalization, this kind of gets into the sausage factory, right? You sometimes don't want to see what's going on in the sausage factory, but let's talk about it just for a little bit. So consider the field that's called relationship to head. So if we were to sit down, we could probably, start to write out dozens, maybe we could get to 100. If we really tried, maybe 200 words that we'd expect to be in this field. This would be like head, wife, spouse, son, daughter, child, boy, these things that also aren't really correct answers, like say child or boy, niece, grandmother, grandfather, all these different permutations. Well, so in this particular work, when we get this back from our indexing team, we see over 16,000 unique values for relationship to head. And so the data normalization work that we do, and all companies in our domain do, is to interpret the many variant and wrong forms of spellings of a value, and to correct those values and to make a new standardized form. So for example, wife, here are some of the types of terms that were recorded for wife. And because this is Canada, we also get a set in French for épouse, or spouse, or wife in French. There are many others for both of these that I could share, but these are just the top 6 for both of those. So when we're done with this normalization, then we end up with a new version of this field that in this case we had, I think, just over 300 standardized versions of relationship to head. And that's important because as we start to build the publication, we also want to present these households on MyHeritage. And so very often you see sometimes, hopefully very often, not as often as we hope, you'll see a really nice clean representation here where the census also recorded these household numbers. And in a perfect world, we'd be able to use these to recreate the households. They would or should give us the start and stop of every household. And you see here we have cases of a household here. Here's an example of a multi-generational household. We have an elderly head, age 68, living with a son, 25, a daughter-in-law, so that's probably the son's wife, and 2 grandchildren of the head. So a grandfather, an adult-age son with his wife, and 2 children. Another example of a multi-generational household here is a 55-year-old head living with his wife, and the mother of the head is also present there at the bottom, age 78. What we saw with the 1931 Canadian Census, though, was a very common practice where it looked like they went through and they changed, overwrote, modified what had been recorded in these household numbers. multiple strikeouts, multiple versions here, which made these quite difficult and unreliable to key. So we had to revert to doing other more complex household reconstruction work, such as looking at not only these fields when they were applicable, but the surnames, understanding when surnames are changing, and the relationship to head field. Some interesting statistics. So what are the top 50 most common surnames in the 1931 Canadian Census? Well, here's the top 10, Smith through Taylor, so 1 through 10, 11 through 20, 21 through 30, 41 through 31 through 40, and 41 through 50. It's certainly helpful to think about the commonality, if that's the proper way to think about it. How common is the surname that you're searching for? And that can certainly impact uh, your search strategy. Conversely, if you have a very uncommon surname, that also can impact your how you search for records. The good thing about common names is they're probably going to be spelled fairly accurately, not perfectly all the time, but uh, most people would write these the same way, and they'd be interpreted from writing the same way. Usually, you would hope. But when you get to uncommon surnames, that is less certain. So what are the 50 least most common surnames? Well, we have a tie. In fact, we have a huge tie. There are over 200,000 surnames that occur once and only once. And here are just 5 or 6 examples. So here's a Pascuala, a Pasalis, a Pasanto, a Passingal. These are all names just that start with the letters P-A-S, and Pastoback. So 5 surnames that occur one time only in all 10.4 million records. So if I was trying to search for a name like this, I want to be much more creative in thinking about how these names might have been spelled, how they might have been written down with misspellings, how they might have been interpreted in the index. All right, so lastly, I'm going to jump into this quick study of this Charles Torkildsen. I apologize if I talk too much about some Norwegian connections. I have a lot of Norwegian family, and I've been having fun investigating some Norwegians here in the 1931 Canadian Census. So one thing when I look at a record like this is I think about, okay, so here's a guy that was born in Norway, and he's going by the name Charles. Charles doesn't feel like a Norwegian name to me. And in just a moment, I'll show you a technique that I use to give me some clues about what his given name likely could have been in Norway. If we were to click into this record more deeply, we would see that we get not only his birth year, but we get his marital status, information that he immigrated to Canada in 1904 and naturalized in 1919. So in college, I ran across this book that I'm going to refer you to, and there's a URL here, this tiny URL that will lead you to a digital version of this book. That's free. That's available at Hothy Trust. It's called Foreign Versions, Variations, and Diminutives of English Names. I think this was actually developed by the US military, but I think it applies for both US and Canada quite well. So if you look at this book, I can come to an entry for the English name Charles on the left side, and over in each column, they're giving me versions of these given names in various languages. So for Sweden and Norwegian, it's recommending that I think about his name being Carl or Kale, even in Sweden or Norway. So again, kind of zooming in on that. So we have Charles and Carl or Kale. So what are some strategies we can think about? How can we go deeper on this Charles Torkildsen?
Well, it looks like we have lost Mike. I'm going to try and get him back. I think he got disconnected. So let's try and get him back. Here, in the meantime, we will take your questions. So if anyone has questions, please do write them in the comments section. I hope we get Mike back in a moment. It looks like he just got disconnected, maybe some internet problems. So I did see there was a question of someone who asked, are these collections already live? So they are live, and you can go to myheritage.com/research, and there you'll see all of our historical record collections. And if you go to, you can sort the our historical records by last updated, and then you'll be able to see all the collections that Mike is talking about, all those recently added collections. You'll be able to see them all there. The collections that he was highlighting that aren't new, you won't be able to see there, but of course you can search through our collection catalog by country, by types of record, and you'll be able to find those collections there. I see Amy asks, is it possible to receive monthly updates of newly listed indexes? So that's exactly what we're doing with these Facebook Live sessions every 2 weeks. We're talking about all the new historical records that were added, and we're doing these Facebook Lives twice a month in order to give you those updates. So we hope that they are helpful and that you do learn about the new collections that are added. I know that often, you know, you just don't check about the newly added collections on the website. So that's why we want to kind of delve into them in these Facebook Lives and give you some more information about them. Let's see, Joseph says, any plans to make the app more functional like the website? I wish consistency and other features from the web can be accessed on the app. So of course, we're always working on our mobile app, on the MyHeritage mobile app, to improve it, to add new features. So definitely stay tuned. And Joseph, I'm not sure if you're aware, but there is a photo app that came out, that we came out with not too long ago, called Reimagine, which includes all of our photo tools. It's really a fantastic app. You can get it anywhere where you download your apps. It's called Reimagine, and it includes, it's a very, very easy scan feature using AI technology. And then you can use all of our well-known and loved photo features, such as enhance, colorize, repair, even animate the photo. So a great app. If you don't have it yet, definitely download it, I suggest. So any other questions, please do let us know. And for anyone who asked about the handout, just to let you all know, I see that Mike is trying to reconnect again. So I hope that we get him back on. I hope that'll happen any moment. Sorry about that, folks. About the handout. So there is no handout today, but of course, you can rewatch today's session. It will be saved on the MyHeritage Facebook page under the videos. So you can watch this one as well as all of our past Facebook Lives. Oh, I see we have Mike again, and he can finish up on his own. Let's see if we can get him up here. Here we go. Hello, Mike. I'm sorry. It seems like you got disconnected. I guess maybe some internet problems or something.
Yeah, something. Well, that's too bad.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So I see a timestamp when it terminated, but I don't know exactly where I was. I was probably still talking about some of the 1931 Canadian Census. If you're okay, I'll just maybe put up one other slide with some of the resources and we'll wrap up. Does that work?
Great. Oh, it's not sharing it yet?
Yeah, sorry.
Joseph's comment, he says, no need to share it out loud. No need to share it out loud, but I just love comments like this where people talk about how much they've grown their family tree through MyHeritage. So thank you so much for sharing, Joseph. He said he grew his family tree from a few dozen to 1,400 in a few months, going back to the 1700s. So we love hearing comments like that. It just makes us feel, like all the work that we're doing is just so important to you and your family. So thank you for sharing that. And if anyone else has any success stories like that, please share as well. Okay, I guess it's no luck sharing the screen this time.
Yeah, I'm trying again. It says that I am, but no. Anyways, wow.
Oh, looks like we've lost him again. Let's see. Okay, we lost him again, so I hope he'll join and we'll just finish up. I hope that we can get to the end of the session so we can do our giveaway as well. Hopefully any moment Mike will just join back in. Here, I think he's here. We'll just try one more time and we'll see if this works. And if so, we'll just finish up. And oh, there, and I see your screen as well. Did we get it? There we go. Perfect.
Alrighty, I apologize if you missed out on my last segment about this use case I was showing of finding someone from the 1931 Canada Census in their Norwegian outbound passenger records and then picking them up coming to the port of New York, and how I was able to make a connection that it was the right family. Now, how they went from New York to Ontario, I have a gap in my understanding there, so always more to do. I just did want to show this screen here, which has some references to the materials. So the 1931 Canada Census, the Census Maps resource that I showed, this book that I don't know if you caught this before we had the technical challenges, but a wonderful book I recommend that you look at, this Foreign Versions, Variations, and Diminutives of English Names. And then if you do want a deeper dive into the 1931 Canada Census, just last week on Friday, actually I recorded a webinar that's freely available at Legacy Webinars. That's nothing but a discussion of the 1931 Canada Census, and there is a URL for that. So with that, Esther, I think we can wrap up.
Thank you so much, Mike. Sorry about those technical difficulties, folks. We did get most of it. We missed just a few moments there, so we're sorry about that. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And our winner for today's My Heritage Complete Plan is Chris Volgertson. And Chris wrote to us and he said, I see many of my great uncles and aunts listed in the 1931 census for Alberta, but not my father, his siblings, or his father. I'll have to keep digging. So it's great to hear that you're already, searching through our Canadian censuses. And we're so glad to hear that. And definitely keep digging. So congratulations, Chris. Please message us on our Facebook page to claim your prize today. Thank you so much for joining us, Mike, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Have a good day, everyone. Bye.